Mike Brown, the former FEMA director.
Joining us here is the former FEMA director.
History, I think, was very unkind to you, my friend. Very unkind.
Mr. Brown, thanks for being with us.
This is Michael Brown Unplugged.
Hey, welcome to this edition of Michael Brown Unplugged. Before we get to the less serious news, I think we ought to get to the more serious news. So apparently this week, Terminix, the pest control company, they have released their 2019 ranking of the top 50 most bed bug infested cities in the country. Now, Philadelphia reclaimed the top title it last held in 2014. Cleveland fell to number 7 after 2 years as number 1 on the list. New York, Dallas, Indianapolis, and Cincinnati rounded out the top 5 spots. And Ohio, what's wrong with Ohio? John Casey, what's going on up there? Ohio dominated the list with 6 cities in the top 50, Florida following closely behind with 5 on the list. Now, Terminix bases its rankings on the number of services rendered in each city in the past year. The top 50 cities for bed bug infestations in the United States are, let's just do the first top 10, and then we'll skip around a little bit. You got Philadelphia, New York, Dallas-Fort Worth, Indianapolis, Cincinnati, Los Angeles, Cleveland, Washington, D.C., Chicago, and Boston. Wow. Hey, where do you want to move to? Well, I don't know. Let's check the Terminix list and figure out who has the biggest bed bug problem. So then you go on through, and of course you've got Houston, Baltimore, Atlanta, Detroit, Pittsburgh, Memphis, Nashville, Orlando. Now think about Orlando. All you tourists going to Orlando, you might want to check for bed bugs. Tampa, Louisville, St. Louis, Little Rock, Dayton, Oklahoma City at number 26. What's wrong with you people in Oklahoma City? Harrisburg, PA, Toledo, Paducah, Fort Smith, Lexington, Kansas City, San Francisco, amazingly, comes in at only number 34. And I think the reason for that is nobody's staying in San Francisco. They're all staying out on the streets. They're pooping on the streets. They're doing the drugs on the streets. They're fornicating on the streets. They're doing everything on the streets. So San Francisco is only number 34 on the list of 50. Then you get to Shreveport, Miami, Hartford, South Bend, Springfield, Missouri, Birmingham, or Missouri, as some of us say, Birmingham, Alabama, Grand Rapids, Jacksonville, Florida, West Palm Beach, the home of Rush Limbaugh. Is number 43 on the most bed bug infested cities in the country. Davenport, Iowa. What's wrong with Davenport, Iowa? Honolulu, Evansville, Indiana, Jackson, Mississippi, Youngstown, Montgomery, Alabama, and rounding out at number 50, Denver. Little old Denver turns out to be the 50th most bed bug infested city in the country based on how many calls Terminix that goes out to eliminate bed bugs. I love lists like this. I love lists. You know, although I have to admit, this is a personal note. So for the past several years, I have been listed on Talkers Magazine as one of the top 100 talk show hosts in the United States. Now, there are thousands of talk show hosts in the country, and there are thousands of talk shows. So to be listed in the top 100, I always consider to be a fantastic honor. It shows that, it shows that I got some talent, regardless of what you may think. And it shows that among those who watch and study talk shows, they recognized my abilities to put me in the top 100. Except this year, I didn't make the list. And I didn't make the list because I don't have a radio program. And so as I'm reading through the list, I'm going through the whole part where it talks about the criteria for this particular trade publication listing the top 100 talk shows in the country. And I didn't expect to be on the list because I know the publisher of this particular magazine, this particular online magazine. And so having talked to him about what had happened to me at iHeart, I didn't expect to be on the list for this year. And sure enough, when the list came out yesterday and I'm reading through it, and then there's a new I guess it's a new paragraph, or maybe I didn't notice it before, but it said something to the effect that there is one criteria which everyone on this list must meet, and that is you must be on a regularly scheduled terrestrial radio program in order to maintain your presence on the list, or to make the list, or to remain on the list at the time of publication. So can I just be real honest? When I read that yesterday, and I saw that I didn't make the list because of the fact I'm no longer on the radio, temporarily, I might add, I hope, I was momentarily depressed. And I was momentarily depressed until I realized, why do we, I love lists. I'm a list maker. In fact, I'm sitting here right now with a list of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 of 9 things that I have to do for my executive producer of this podcast. So I am a list maker, and I love lists like these top 50 cities of bed bugs. Then I realized, why am I depressed? I know what my talents are. I know what my abilities are. I know that in the past I've been on that list, and I know but for the fact that I am not currently on a terrestrial radio program, I would be in the top 100 talk shows in the country. The lesson? The lesson is this, and I slapped myself silly a few times. Don't let those kinds of things define who you are. If you have the talent, whether or not somebody else recognizes talent, doesn't make any difference. What should count is, do you know you have talent? Are you using that talent to the best of your ability? And do those that you care about recognize that you have talent? And of course I do, because Greta the Leonberger and Rooney the wired-haired dachshund are sitting here with me this morning as I'm doing the podcast, and they know I have talent because they're both over there sound asleep snoring. So Denver, congratulations on making the list of top 50 bed bug infested cities in the country. Oh, good grief. Speaking of lists, at least 52 people were shot, 8 of them fatally, across Chicago over the past weekend. That put it at the most violent of the year, and summer is just starting. With the toll over this past weekend was even higher than during the long Memorial Day holiday just a week earlier. More than half the victims were wounded during a 12-hour burst of gunfire from Friday evening to Saturday morning. At least 4 of the 31 people shot during that time died after attacks on the south and west side of Chicago. At least 1 other person over the weekend was fatally stabbed, bringing the homicide toll to 9. Now, the level of violence, which typically does spike during the summer, eclipsed that of the 3-day Memorial Day weekend when at least 43 people were shot, 7 of them fatally. Eddie Johnson, remember Eddie Johnson? He's the police superintendent. He's the one that's really pissed off about the Jussie Smollett case. He held a news conference Monday morning calling the level of violence despicable. Well, it may be despicable, but how about unacceptable? Wouldn't unacceptable be a better adjective than despicable? In a statement Sunday night, the department's chief spokesman said that the superintendent, Eddie Johnson, ordered targeted patrols in areas of potential retaliation by gangs. Those efforts have resulted in 19 arrests on gun-related charges, and this is the shocker for me. I have a hard time getting my head around this stat because the Democrats keep telling us that we need more gun control. I'm not sure what they mean by that, but they want, common sense gun control legislation. I think they call it common sense gun safety legislation. But listen to this. Those efforts over the past weekend, the targeted patrols, have resulted in 19 arrests on gun-related charges and 81 illegal weapons seized since Friday night. Several people of interest are also being questioned in relation to some of our incidents, and detectives have good video leads in others. 81 illegal weapons? How did these thugs get the illegal weapons? I thought that it was illegal. But then I'm also conflicted because you may recall that Barack Obama told us, well, that anybody can get a gun. Remember yesterday when I played you the clip from Obama talking to some audience down in Brazil about how...
I've said this before, the most difficult day that I've had was the day that there was a shooting in a school where 20 small children were shot, as well as some teachers. And my daughters were only a little bit older than these young children that had been shot, and I had to go and comfort the parents. And some of you may be aware, our gun laws in the United States don't make much sense. Anybody can buy any weapon anytime.
And the audience cheers. Anybody can buy a weapon anytime, anywhere. So my challenge to you, and I know Agent Jed A has already done this, but my challenge to you is, if you can buy a weapon anytime, anywhere, go try that. Go try to buy a .50 caliber somewhere. Now, you can't go to Federal Boulevard because you can't cheat. You can't go down. You can't go down to the hood and try. And maybe you could probably buy. I've always said I want a bazooka. I just haven't had the initiative to go looking for a bazooka. And I'm sure that if I went, because Obama's telling me that apparently I can get a gun anytime, anywhere. So I bet if I dug long and hard enough, if I went to just the right hood, I might be able to get my bazooka. And then my life would be complete. I would have my bazooka. I don't understand why is the audience cheering? Are they cheering because they believe what Obama said, that our gun laws are such that you can buy a gun anytime, anywhere, and that's what Brazilians would like to do? Or do they just want to get a wax? I mean, a Brazilian wax. How many in this audience know what a Brazilian wax is? Huh? Do you?
Without much, if any, regulation, they can buy it over the internet, they can buy machine guns. And
that's enough of Obama. We don't have to listen to him again. And without much effort, you can buy any kind of gun you want over the internet, including machine guns. I just somebody needs to go back to Chicago and explain to explain to the superintendent of police in Chicago that the problem is the internet. They just need to shut down the internet. What would make common sense gun safety legislation? Now, let's forget about the word safety, because that's only a word that they throw in between common sense, gun, and legislation. Because if you hear the word safety, well, oh, yes, safety. Who's not for safety, right? We're all for safety. In fact, I think that every single gun owner that I know, I think I can say this with absolute certainty, every single gun owner that I know, well, that's not a crook, that's not a thug. I do know a couple of thugs. I know people. They care deeply about safety. So take the word safety out. They want common sense gun legislation. And if the problem is that you had, 31 illegal guns found in Chicago in this sweep, then how are you going to get rid of those 31 guns? I also heard, in fact, let me check just to make certain about this. Oh, yeah. Well, and in fact, I knew I was right. I haven't pulled up the story, but at the top of my Google search, see, I can use Google now that I'm not there. I can use Google. 4 killed in mass shooting in northern Australia. Darwin shooting. Darwin? Does that mean, well, insert your own joke there. Darwin shooting, 4 killed in northern Australia. Washington Post, tighter gun laws were already on Australians' minds, then a gunman killed at least 4 people. Now, Australia already has some of the strictest gun control legislation on the books in the world. And yet somebody managed to go out and kill 4 people in what CNN International obviously is calling a mass shooting. I don't think that 4 meets the definition of the FBI crime statistics of being a mass shooting, but let's not quibble over the numbers. But let's do quibble over this. If someone's determined to hurt, maim, kill somebody else, they're going to find a way to do that. And until we come to grips with that reality, and until we come to grips with the reality that the reason we have the Second Amendment is primarily because we recognize that governments can become tyrannical, and the best defense against a tyrannical government is what? Repeat after me. An armed citizenry. It's kind of funny in this country, we need to have an armed citizenry. We're supposed to have an informed citizenry. We're supposed to be an involved and participatory citizenry. It seems to me that when the founders put together this republic, that they were actually thinking that people would be actively involved in their own defense, in the defense of the country, in the defense against tyranny. They would be involved in all sorts of ways. And when we look around the world, all we have to see is that if you really want to impose tyranny, take away the ability of people to arm themselves. Now, this podcast must really be a revisit of everything that I did yesterday, because I want to go back. Remember I told you the story about this ex-Trump lawyer, John Dowd, and how a voicemail that he had left was selectively edited in the Mueller report? Well, John Dowd was on Fox News last night, and he, rather than me describing, as I did yesterday, the differences in the voicemail, which are important, you can tell where it was selectively edited to make it appear that what John Dowd was doing was walking up to, if not crossing the line of obstructing justice. But when you read the entire transcript of the voicemail, it was anything but. So John Dowd is on Fox News last night and says this.
Well, I had an obligation as counsel to the president to find out what was going on, and I'm so glad Judge Sullivan ordered the transcript, because we now know the truth, and we also know that this entire report by Mueller is a fraud, and we're going to find more of these things. Isn't it ironic that this man who kept indicting and prosecuting people for process crimes committed a false statement in his own report? By taking out half my words, they changed the Ikai, the tenor, and the contents of that conversation with Robert Kellner. And it's an outrage, and there's probably more of it.
There probably is more of it. This is precisely what Bill Barr is investigating. Well, let me rephrase that. This is precisely part of what the Attorney General is investigating. He is looking at all of the facts, all of the empirical, documentary, whatever kind of evidence there is behind the Mueller report. He's reviewing all of that. And in addition to that, he is looking at, the Attorney General is looking at all of the actions taken by the FBI and other people to determine whether or not crimes were committed in the creation of this narrative that somehow there was Russian collusion. Now, I know I don't need to do this, but I'm going to do it anyway. Let's differentiate between Russians attempting to influence the election, because nobody questions that. In fact, we would be complete idiots if we questioned that enemies and allies alike try to influence our elections, any more than we would be absolute fools to say that we, as the United States, that we don't try to influence elections. Of course we do. We try to influence elections among our enemies and among our allies. So the collusion is different and separate from the Russian attempts at interference. And what we're now finding is in terms of Russian collusion, there was none. And in terms, at least now, of obstruction of justice, there's at least a question of what the hell was the FBI doing when it decided it was going to selectively edit the transcript of a voicemail. Now, I don't want to point out the obvious here, but how stupid does the FBI have to be? Because if you're editing a transcript of a voicemail, what does that mean? That means that somewhere there's the actual voicemail. And in this case, Judge Sullivan, he suffers no fools. Judge Sullivan ordered the release of the actual voicemail so that there could be a comparison between what was in the report, what was in the court documents, and what was actually said. I don't know, but it really raises the question. Sarah Carter has a story headlined this. And I'm sorry if you're, and I've got lots of friends that still work for the FBI. But this is getting absurd. Sarah Carter has a story up today that the FBI failed to document four Clinton witness interviews. I don't know of any FBI field agent. I don't know of any FBI special agent in charge. In other words, any FBI agent outside the Beltway, that if they were interviewing a witness, that there wouldn't be a 402, I think it's a 402, which is the document that they create that memorializes the interview itself. Here's what Sarah Carter writes. The FBI failed to document at least 4 interviews of witnesses in the Bureau's investigation into former presidential candidate Hillary Clinton's use of a private server to send classified emails, according to documents obtained by the government watchdog Judicial Watch. Parenthetical. I don't often suggest that if you're going to support somebody, but if you want to know of any group inside the Beltway that is actually trying to hold Washington, D.C. accountable, it is Judicial Watch. The story continues. Judicial Watch also discovered among the 218 pages of emails between former FBI Special Agent Peter Strzok and his paramour, former FBI attorney Lisa Page, that then FBI General Counsel James Baker had instructed, quote, FBI officials to expedite the release of FBI investigative material to Hillary Clinton's lawyer, David Kendall, in August of 16. Kendall and the FBI's top lawyer discussed specifically quickly obtaining it's a 302, not a 402, quickly obtaining the 302 report of the FBI DOJ interview of Mrs. Clinton. Sarah writes, these findings are significant as they come at a crucial time when the Department of Justice under Attorney General William Barr is investigating the Bureau's handling of both the Clinton probe and the investigation into the origination of the Bureau's investigation into President Donald Trump's campaign alleged and now debunked ties to Russia. It is rotten in River City. And I hate to say that because when you can't trust the Federal Bureau of Investigation, when you can't trust the nation's top law enforcement office to do their job and to do it according to the rule book, then there is no rule book. And I know that many people think, well, I'm never going to commit a crime and nothing's ever going to happen to me. You may never be involved in a crime. You might end up being a witness to a crime. And so you get called in. Hey, Mr. Brown, we'd like to interview about your friend, Joe Blow, who, we'd like to talk to you about Joe Blow. They may not tell me anything about Joe Blow, but we want to talk to you about Joe Blow. Would you please come down? Or we'd be more than happy to show up at your house. Anything you say, even though you are not at that point a target of the investigation, could indeed lead to some sort of rabbit hole where you become a target of the investigation. Which reminds me, I need to reiterate, don't ever talk to law enforcement without a lawyer present. Just don't do it. And shame on the FBI. Absolute shame on them. So you know that one of my big bugaboos is multiculturalism, because I think that while everybody should be able to celebrate the culture of their ancestors, just like I like to go to New Mexico, to the undisclosed location, and I love the Mexican, New Mexican, the Southwest culture that I'm able to wrap myself around in northern New Mexico. I have no problem with that. I want people to celebrate their ancestry, and I want them to celebrate their forebears. But multiculturalism is not that. Multiculturalism is just another way of saying that there are no guardrails, that there is no culture, and that everything goes. Well, the federal government and the collaborating do-gooder NGOs, the non-government organizations, have now established a massive 80,000-strong Somali colony in the formerly highly livable area of Minneapolis. Now, since the mainstream media is never going to do it, let me bring you up to date on how this is working out for the natives in Minneapolis. During a single week last month, during one single week, on Wednesday, May 15, a couple of university students were attacked on the campus at the East Bank train station by two Somali thugs. On Thursday, the next day, May 16, two Somalis burned down the pavilion at Lake Calhoun, an eating and hanging out meeting place in the heart of Minneapolis. So that's Wednesday, that's Thursday, and now Friday, May 17. A gang of 10 to 12 Somali youths attacked all the white people at the same East Bank train station with hammers and pipes. You wonder why I refer to them as thugs? And you also wonder why I encourage people to learn about self-defense. You're waiting at the train station. Someone is coming at you with a hammer or a pipe. Now, you can maybe move left or right, depending on how crowded the train platform is, or you can jump on the tracks. So you look to see if there's a train coming, and sure enough, there's a train coming. So now you have to make the decision. Do I jump on the tracks and run the risk of the train killing me? Or do I stand on the platform and let these 10 to 12 Somali thugs attack me with a hammer or a pipe? You know, the assimilation difficulties did not spring up all at once. Somalis have now scammed more than $100 million from the welfare system when so many came to the United States and just simply exploited our generosity. Dozens of them have already been documented to have joined Islamic terror outfits, including ISIS. You may recall that Somali police officer Mohammed Noor murdered Justice Demond while she talked with another officer. In 2018, a Somali student at St. Catherine University attempted to burn down the school and hurt people, saying, quote, "You guys are lucky that I don't know how to build a bomb because I would have done that." Seriously? The jihadis are among us. And we just, because they're Somalis, so we can't say anything. The bottom line is this. When you import massive numbers of people from the most violent and the most dysfunctional place on earth, what are you doing? You are importing violence and dysfunction into this country. It isn't the soil. It isn't the dirt. It isn't the air that makes Somalia a hell. It is the people who live there. The damage has been done to Minnesota. The rabidly anti-American Somali refugee Ilan Omar was sent to represent Minneapolis, was sent to the United States Congress. This anti-Semite serves on the House Foreign Affairs Committee. Who knows? You can chastise me for this. There is no evidence of it. But should I be surprised if I were to find out somewhere down the road that she was, well, I know she's a supporter of CARE. I know she's a supporter of the Muslim Brotherhood. Would I ever be surprised to learn that she was actually part of a sleeper cell, or that she was in some way funneling money to sleeper cells in this country? Those who proclaim that the United States is a nation of immigrants, when they do that, they're referring to very discrete periods when the country absorbed these huge numbers of new citizens from abroad. These immigrants, those immigrants, were able and expected to assimilate. But the Somali colonists of Minneapolis, they're never going to assimilate. Although, with the encouragement of the welfare state, they're going to grow more numerous and they're going to spread. And I could say something about spreading like bed bugs, but that might offend somebody. And, oh my gosh, I certainly wouldn't want to offend anybody. Diversity is not strength. Diversity in the culture is not strength. It is weakness. And the events taking place in Minneapolis should make this obvious. There's a fine line between respecting and celebrating the culture of others and assimilating when you come to this country. There's also a fine line. Actually, it's not such a fine line. There's a very distinct line between a culture that is just riddled with criminality, with violence, with anti-Semitism, and coming to this country and putting those things aside. They are not putting it aside in Minneapolis. I told you that for whatever reason, this podcast seems to be going back and referring to a lot of what I did yesterday. And if you haven't listened to yesterday's podcast, well, then get off your butt and go listen to yesterday's podcast because it was pretty good. I actually had a comment from somebody that, because if you're not aware, I was reading, in fact, I will pull out another one. I was reading letters from a World War II vet. Hang on. Boo, 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 boo. Here, I'm back. Let me open another one because here is one. This one is postmarked, and I'm doing this because we are coming up on the anniversary of D-Day, June 6, 1944. Again, postmarked Denver. This one is 24 of March, but I can't tell the year. Again, I'm not going to read his name, but it is under his name. It says, WW Roman numeral II vet, World War II vet, Mike Brown. The secret is to avoid all the feces. I would use the word, and I know many of you want me to curse on the podcast, but then I would have to mark it as explicit. And I know some people like that, but I'm trying to reach a broad audience. So as much as I have joked in the past on the radio about there's one word I'd like to use, and it's the S word, now that I have the opportunity to do it, I'm not. So you can call me a hypocrite or whatever. The secret, this World War II vet wrote me. Now remember, I'm reading this for the first time. I just opened it, and I'm reading it right out of the envelope. Mike Brown. The secret is to avoid all the feces that are taking their toll on people. Screw them all. Many people don't get royal red carpet treatment. They got K rations, C rations, MREs, or whatever is the latest feces. They get early retirements without any insurance or pensions. I wish I could snap my fingers and change everything. Screw all the gods. Harry had the right idea. Harry Truman, do you think? Isn't this fascinating? Is he referring to Harry Truman? Harry had the right idea. Only 10% of the World War II vets are left. All the others are long gone. The bastards screwed up the American dream. Today it's in sports, music, golf, drugs, and feces. What, quote, representatives, close quote, sincerely, a vanishing American. And then like every letter, it says, over, and there's something on the backside. I only have contempt for the bastards. Screw the Post. and boob tube. A World War II vet. I read that letter because Elizabeth Warren is still on the campaign trail. And she now tells us,
so I'm excited to be here to talk about this, and I'll tell you why. America's faced huge challenges before. World War II, put a man on the moon. This environmental catastrophe bearing down on us may be the biggest challenge yet. But how do we beat it? How do we beat it? We do it by what we've always done as Americans. We invest in science, in innovation.
We spend money. That's how we do it. But forget that. She just compared climate change, this environmental catastrophe that we are ostensibly facing, is greater than the threat of World War II. I don't know, and I can't remember, and I'm having a brain fart. And the funny thing is, I'm having a brain fart on a podcast where what I could simply do is I could simply hit the pause button and go look it up. But I'm not going to do that because I'm going to lose my train of thought if I do. Have you ever thought about what the world would look like if we had failed on June 6, 1944? Or if the Germans had, and of course it's debatable whether they were actually on the way to developing an atomic bomb or not. But what if they had developed the atomic bomb before we did? What if they had dropped the atomic bomb? What if we had lost? What would the world look like if the Nazis and the imperialist Japanese had achieved world domination? I only say that because there's and I forget whether it's on Showtime or HBO, Netflix, but there's a movie there's a series that is about that very thing. And the United States of America is divided into two countries. Pretty much everything from Denver to the west is controlled by the Japanese, and everything from Denver to the east is controlled by the Nazis. And it's kind of this science fiction mixed in with a historical perspective of what would it be like had the Axis won. And for the life of me, I can't remember the name of the show. But I'd like to ask Elizabeth Warren that. As I said again, everything's going back to what I talked about yesterday. But all of the weather stations in Antarctica for the entire year of 2018 show no warming. And the Antarctic sea ice extent has grown even larger. Yet we continue to be bombarded with lie after lie after lie that if we don't do something, and I guess it's 12 years, a good baker's dozen, or maybe that would be 13, a good 12 years from now, a dozen years, I don't know where Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez came up with that, but if we don't do something, we're all going to perish. I would rather do nothing, absolutely nothing, and let the climate just do whatever the climate's going to do. And if the floods are going to get worse, then maybe we should build more seawalls. Maybe we should build more levees and actually make sure they're built correctly and not give them over to some corrupt government like we did in Louisiana. Or if there are going to be more tornadoes, build more safe houses, safe rooms. If there's going to be more wildfires, teach people how to build a safe zone around their home. There are all sorts of things that we can actually do to mitigate against disaster without some gigantic public policy that spends millions of dollars. And quite frankly, I don't see any of those things as an existential threat. They're not an existential threat because fires, floods, tornadoes, hurricanes, earthquakes, volcanoes, whatever you want to point to, has occurred on this soil since before anybody was here. The existential threat that we face is a tyrannical government and a bunch of progressives that want to impose that tyranny under the guise of climate change policies. We should fear that. If you want to fear something, fear what they want to do. Oh, and it's not just Elizabeth Warren. Got an email from Joe Biden today. Michael. Joe 2020. Michael. Nothing gives me more hope for the future than seeing my 5 grandchildren challenge expectations. They'll see breakthroughs in technology we can't even yet imagine. Now remember that, because that is absolutely true. But then he says this. But the only way they're going to get the chance to fulfill all that potential is if we take drastic action right now to address the climate disaster facing the nation and our world. So today, he writes, I'm announcing my plan for a clean energy revolution and environmental justice. Good, because I thought if we're going to have a clean energy revolution, you can't have a revolution without having environmental justice, right? It'd be like the old Soviet Union kangaroo courts. His email continues, science tells us that how we act or fail to act in the next 12 years, here's that 12 years again, in the next 12 years will determine the very livability of our planet. Yet today, President Trump denies the evidence in front of his own eyes, hides climate science produced by his own administration, and actively works to roll back what progress we have already made. It's reckless, it's irresponsible, and it's unacceptable. Well, wait a minute, Joe. How do you square that with the very beginning of your paragraph that says, nothing gives me more hope for the future than seeing my 5 grandchildren challenge expectations. They will see breakthroughs in technology we can't even yet imagine. He's right. So if that is correct, then why is he demanding that we implement some sort of government-wide policy in order to save ourselves from doom in the next 12 years? These people are, I need a sip of Diet Coke. So 30 years ago, a man stood in front of a column of tanks, halting their hulking passage from Tiananmen Square a day after the bloodshed of June 4. The man has never been identified, but according to the Wall Street Journal, images of his defiance became a symbol of protest against the powerful around the world, except in China, where they have been censored and banished from public memory. The Wall Street Journal article goes on to say that Tank Man images are ruthlessly excised from Chinese social media, according to monitoring services. When the British journalist Louisa Lim was researching a 2015 book on the Tiananmen events and the suppression of their memory, she showed the iconic photo of the Tank Man to 100 students at 4 universities in Beijing. 100 students, 4 separate universities in Beijing. Only 15 correctly identified it, 2 by guessing, in the book that she wrote, The People's Republic of Amnesia. Apparently, access to China's official archives is increasingly restrictive. Online databases run by Chinese academic institutions are eliminating articles seen as, quote, problematic by the government. And then, of course, there's just the typical communist intimidation with the government banning the books of Chinese academics and refusing visas to foreign scholars whose work it dislikes. And I haven't, honestly, thought a lot about Tank Man, and I haven't thought a lot about the fact that yesterday was the 30th anniversary of all of that taking place in Tiananmen Square. But Helen Raleigh has written an article, and in this article she says that with the 30th anniversary, it may be time to reconsider the image of Tank Man in new ways. She says often our image of Tank Man is a man standing up to a 3 or 4 tank convoy. We are taken with his bravery, she writes. But I never knew this. And I guess that's just because you see the iconic photo. There's that man holding the 2 grocery bags, standing in front of the tanks. that have come to a halt. But Helen Raleigh says, a wider shot taken by Stuart Franklin gives a new perspective. The convoy that Tank Man stops is at least a dozen tanks, backed by lines of foot soldiers. Tank Man's bravery is shown in new relief. And then she mentions the grocery bags. Unfortunately, or perhaps fortunately for him, Tank Man's identity is lost to history. Nobody knows who that young man was. And nobody knows what happened to him since that singular act of heroic bravery. But then Helen writes this: the grocery bags in his hands have always particularly resonated with me. We don't know his age. We don't know if he took part in the protests. From his simple outfit and the grocery bags in his hands, it is safe to assume that he didn't set out to be a hero or do anything extraordinary on that summer day. He might have just been returning from a regular trip to the grocery store when he saw injustice about to occur. Whatever the circumstances were, Helen writes, he took action. She writes, since I live in the United States now, the likelihood I ever see a convoy of armored vehicles rolling down Main Street is very low. Still, when I look at the photo now, I can't help thinking about my weekly trips to the grocery store. And then she writes this, and I ask you the same question. Would I be prepared, she writes, in that moment to risk my life for my ideals? Would any of us? Tank Man. Not only is that iconic photograph and the new perspective of the dozens of tanks and the hundreds, if not thousands of soldiers lined up behind him, really gives new meaning to the significance of what he did that day. And I don't want us to forget that. But here's what I want us to consider instead. Helen's right. Would I be prepared in the moment to risk my life for my ideals? Would any of us? That's a great question. And I think most Americans, pushed to the brink, would do so. And I think it would be a domino effect. I think one Tank Man leads to a second, to a third, to dozens, hundreds, and then thousands. I truly think that's what Americans would do if they were pushed to the brink. But here's the other thing that catches my mind about the anniversary of Tiananmen Square. It's been erased from Chinese history. Why do you do that? Why do these governments of tyranny want so desperately to erase history? Because they do not want any reminders of what happened, and I think even more importantly, what could have followed. Because but for the crackdown on that day, and but for the erasing of that history, there might still be a widespread democratic underground revolt just simmering beneath the surface in China. And there may still be some of that. But that flame has been snuffed out. It's just like a pilot light now. And there's nobody there to turn on the stove to bring the flame up to full bore because they've erased the history. You think that I may be nuts when I say, but that's what's happening in this country. I don't care what you think about the Civil War. I don't care whether you were for the North or the South. I don't care whether you see it as an economic war, a states' rights war, a war over slavery. I don't care about any of that. But here's what I do care about. I care about the fact that there are too many people in this country who are willing to destroy, hide, eviscerate the history of the Civil War because somehow they think that that pimple on the butt of American history is something that we should hide and get rid of. No. We should study it. We should understand it. We should understand what drove us to that point. Just as we should not ignore the slavery that precipitated that war. We shouldn't cover up the statue of Washington or Jefferson or anybody else that owned slaves. We should recognize them for the greatness that they are and for the faults that they had. We should never judge them by the lens of today. What we should do instead is recognize, and if you understand American history, you know exactly where I'm going. Yes, they were slave owners. That was the norm of the day. But if you actually read what they wrote, what they talked about, what they conversed, why there was the 3/5 clause in the Constitution, all of those were steps that they took trying to keep the, you might call them progressives, of trying to progress to the point where they could abolish slavery. And if all we do is just look at a narrow lens, if all we do is look through the crack in a fence and say, oh, look, they own slaves, therefore they're bad. That's like looking at me and judging me solely on Katrina, or judging you on your last worst act. Think about that. What was your last worst thing that you did? Is that how you want your entire life judged? Of course it isn't. So on this anniversary of Tiananmen Square, let's do recognize and remember Tank Man. God rest his soul if he's gone. Who knows what the communist Chinese did to him. But let's stop for a moment and just recognize his bravery. And let's ask ourselves if we would be prepared in the moment to risk our lives for our ideals. Would any of us do that? And if any one of us would do that, how many would then go stand in line behind the American tank man that's standing up for what they believe in? You see, I think that's part of what drives the division in our politics today. You and I know, based on our history, based upon our Constitution, based on the fact that this is a unique country in the history of mankind, founded on not the supremacy of the state, but the supremacy of the individual. And that individual liberty is what has made America great, and that every attempt, whether it be in a school board meeting, a county commissioners meeting, a city council meeting, a state legislature, or the United States Congress, any attempt to limit your individual liberty and your individual freedom is one step further away from what the original intent was of this country. And if you look around, if you just look around at all, at the stuff in your life that is regulated, that you are limited in what you can and cannot do, you'd wake up and you'd think to yourself, the country's already lost. But it's not. The country's not lost. But we are in a great battle. The tanks are lined up. And the tanks that are lined up are the tanks of tyranny, the tanks of overregulation, the tanks that just squish and snuff out individual liberty and freedom, all in the name of security, all in the name of safety, because too many people are afraid to live in liberty. They're too afraid to live in freedom. They want that comfort. They want somebody to swaddle them in the comfort of government security. You do not want that. So on this day after the anniversary of Tiananmen Square, would you be the first tank man? Maybe not. Would you be the second or third? Would you even get in line with Tank Man? Would you even stand up to the tanks? I hope so. Let's get a taxpayer relief shot in. This comes to us from Las Vegas. And you'll hear this officer, as he's describing what took place, refer to an OIS. That's an officer-involved shooting.
It was 1200 North Town Center Drive, and it was a stakeout. Shots were fired at approximately 12:17 a.m. on the 31st of May. Our suspects, first is David Randazzo. He's 39 years old, white male adult, 5'11", 220 pounds. Randazzo's co-conspirator is a juvenile female who was his partner in the robbery series and was present during the OIS. She sustained a shrapnel injury to her left forearm during the incident. Due to her age, we will not be identifying her. Randazzo's weapon was a Ruger LCP S/A .380 handgun. No rounds were in the chamber. No rounds were fired. His vehicle was a silver Nissan Murano, and that vehicle was reported stolen on May 1st, 2019. On Thursday, May 30th, major violator detectives and the air unit established surveillance on the two suspects. During surveillance, Randazzo drove to the 7-Eleven located at 1200 North Town Center Drive, parked the vehicle at the gas pumps, and exited while the female stayed in the car. When Randazzo exited, detectives made the decision to use their vehicles to block Randazzo's vehicle. As the detectives approached in their unmarked vehicles, Randazzo ran back to his vehicle and jumped in. Detectives exited their vehicles and issued commands to Randazzo at gunpoint to exit the vehicle and surrender. Randazzo refused to surrender, pulled out his firearm, and began to point it at detectives.
I can stop right there. And now you know the rest of the story. You know how it turns out. Thugs are stupid. Now, what you don't see in the video is, it's kind of funny because, well, it's not funny. The thug tried to kill a bunch of cops. But what's funny is, these detectives all pull up in their unmarked cars. One's a mom van. One looks like some little, I forget what model this car is, but it's this car I've always made fun of. And they just surround this guy. So where does he think he's going? I'm always amazed at what goes through a thug's brain when you look up and you've got cops swarming 360 degrees around you. Yeah, let me jump out of the car and point my weapon. If I'm going to go out, I'm going to go out in a blaze of glory. Suicide by cop, or just suicide by stupidity. And thus ends the taxpayer relief shot of today. Now, before you quit listening, I got to tell you something. So a week from Thursday, we're going to do a Zoom meeting. Go to Zoom, Z-O-O-M, zoom.us, and download a little app to your computer or to your phone, your iPad, whatever it is. And at 7 p.m. a week from Thursday, we're going to have a little town hall meeting. Everybody will have a chance, if you sign into Zoom, and we'll publish the number so you'll know what meeting to join. And if you join that meeting, then at 7 o'clock a week from Thursday, 7 p.m., anybody that wants to can join, and it'll be an Ask Michael Anything. Because we're trying to find out, one, who's listening to the podcast, what do you like, what do you not like, plus in lieu of, in fact, this will be one of the questions, is do you guys want to start having, maybe once a month or something, have a get-together somewhere, which I'd like to do, but I don't want to do it unless you guys want to do it. So mark your calendar for a week from Thursday for 7 p.m. I'll keep reminding you over the next several days that we're going to have a Zoom meeting. It's not on Facebook. It's not on YouTube, not to confuse you. It's on Zoom. So go to ZOOM.us. It's an easy plug-in. I've got it on all of my computers now, and it's how I communicate back with my executive producer and with the guy that actually does the editing down in. I've never told you this, have I? The gentleman that does the actual editing of the podcast is in, of all places, Caracas. Yeah, he's in Caracas. So we'll do that a week from Thursday at 7 p.m. Now, here's where I ask you, as I do every week, subscribe to us on iTunes. And if you do it on iTunes and you subscribe there, please leave a 5-star rating and write a review. I'm just trying to build that up because it helps us eventually get it maybe on the new and noteworthy with iTunes. And then go to michaelbrowntoday.com, michaelbrowntoday.com, because when you go to the website, across the bottom there are all of the icons for social media. So if you want to subscribe to YouTube, you can just click there and do it. If you want to follow on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or LinkedIn, all of those are at michaelbrowntoday.com. And all you have to do is just go to the website, click it on, so I don't have to sit here and list all the different places you can go. It's one-stop shopping. Trying to make this as easy as possible. And then you can always shoot me an email too. Michael at michaelbrowntoday.com. Love to hear from you. Tell me what you think about the podcast. The numbers continue. The trend line is good. I'd like the trend line to be a little bit better. And you guys can help me do that by sharing the podcast not only with your friends and family, but people that you think it might irritate. So if you know somebody that I might irritate, tell them to listen to this podcast. Tell them I'm some nut job left-wing communist and that they really need to listen to this. Yeah, then I'll talk to you again tomorrow.